Hi, and welcome back to Apology, a podcast about books and reading. I'm Jesse Pearson, the founder and editor of Apology magazine. Today's guest is the writer Dennis Cooper. He's a writer who's got a really long and varied bibliography that goes from fiction to nonfiction to poetry, but he always maintains a really recognizable voice. I feel like there's a world that his writing takes place in that's not quite ours, runs kind of parallel to our world. And I believe that unlike a lot of writers, he qualifies at this point for adjective status. I think you can call something Cooperian or Cooperian or however you would pronounce it, and people who've read his work will immediately know what you mean. Dennis's work includes a lot of sexual violence, disaffection or lack of affect among the characters, and references to music, like lots of indie rock and Britpop. He's probably most well known now for what's called the George Miles cycle, which consists of the books Closer, Frisk, Try, Guide, and Period. And they are all in their own ways inspired by his childhood friend and later briefly his boyfriend, George Miles, who was a tragic figure who committed suicide later in life. Dennis has made his obsessive thought about Miles, I think, into one of the most unique group of books ever written. And they're all in his signature prose style, which is clear and diamond sharp. His most recent book is I Wished, which is a very moving capstone to the Miles cycle. It's not technically a part of it. It's more personal, and it does more emotional work than the previous books. That's in my opinion. It's fanciful in parts, though. A crater and a head wound are both speaking characters in it, but it's also very naked in its approach. It's a great book, and you don't need to have read the Miles cycle to get into it. Though honestly, I would advise reading all 5 of them anyway. It's a really important body of work. I'd also check out his essay collection, Smothered in Hugs, if you want to get started on Dennis Cooper too. So yeah, let's get into it. Here is Dennis Cooper on the Apology Podcast. So what are you reading right now?
I'm actually reading a couple of things that haven't been published yet. So people send me books looking for blurbs quite a lot, and the only things I'm actually reading now are these. There's 2 books I have for blurbs. I don't know if you want to know what they are. They're not out yet.
If they're going to come out and you enjoy them, yeah, I'd like to hear about them.
One is this novel called X, by someone named Davy Davis. I guess Catapult is publishing it. And it's I'm not so far into it. It's kind of an apocalyptic novel set in New York, and there's all these people in like sadism and drugs and sex. I get a lot of those books.
Yeah, I was going to ask. Yeah,
yeah. But it's actually very, very, very good. The prose is. I usually don't like. I usually don't read for content. I don't really care what the content is. And if a book has content that's interesting and then that's like a bonus or something, but I really just read for the prose of the style and the structure and all that kind of stuff, because that's what kind of gets me off. So, but I mean, having that stuff in there, electrifies it a bit. But anyway, it's very, very well written. So yeah, it's good. And then I'm reading this other book. Do you know who Pierre Clementi is?
No, I don't think I do.
He's a French actor and filmmaker. He's best known for, I think the movie he's most known for is Belle Jour.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And he's in Pasolini's Pigsty, and he's in The Conformist by Bertolucci, and a lot of films. Anyway, right. He's like one of my heroes. He's kind of this unbelievably daring actor. It was mostly in the 60s and 70s. And he also made these extremely strange and psychedelic experimental films that I like very much. And he was arrested in the 60s for possession of LSD, and he was in prison for a while. And he wrote this journal, kind of manifesto/journal, while he was in prison. And I've been wanting to read it for decades, and it's finally being published in the United States in English. So I'm actually reading that because they want me to say something about it. So that's pretty exciting, because he's really like a super, he's like the kind of person that would be should be a hero to anybody who wants to make art, just completely uncompromising guy. Yeah, so those are the 2 books that I'm actually looking at the moment.
That journal sounds really great.
It is. He's not a great writer, but it's very interesting, and he's describing the prison and being in prison, but also just, basically pontificating about the importance of being, unique and original and
right,
that kind of stuff.
I tend to like prison memoirs.
Yeah.
I was thinking of like The Ballad of Reading Jail by Oscar Wilde, or Genet.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's really true. And this one's really short too, which is good.
That's always good.
He wasn't in there very long. It was just LSD, so.
Oh, in America now, if you get busted with that, you're in jail for the rest of your life, pretty much.
Well, yeah, this was France in the 60s, so I guess they were slightly less intense.
Right. Well, thinking about you blurbing books, I actually just read Castle Faggot.
Oh, I love that
Which,
book.
Yeah, you blurbed it as the greatest novel ever written.
well, they pulled that out of the conversation that I had with Zach Farley at the end of it, and I was being a little bit, kind of comedic there. But it is. I mean, when I was reading it, I thought this is like the greatest novel ever. Everybody should just quit, and there's nobody should ever write a novel again. I do love that book. Yeah, it's super visionary.
I've never read anything like it. It was like exhilarating, the prose.
Yeah. He's great.
Would you be able to tell me a little bit of the 101 on that book for our listeners?
Well, it's ostensibly it's like a novel that's set in Paris, and it's set inside sort of a brothel, but it's also sort of a gift store and a, I don't know, kind of a strange haunted house amusement attraction or something. And yeah, it's basically just that, and it's like it's not at all linear. It's almost like the writing is like the architecture. It's like architecture or something. It's extremely funny and very outrageous and filthy. And
quite scatological.
Very scatological. It's just kind of like this. It's like an experience or something. It's like and then it goes, and then it's back at the end of it's like the same thing backwards. It's like, it's really, I'm dazzled by people who try to do something really innovative with prose, and Derek's been a great writer. I mean, I love all of his books, but this is really knocking it out of the park. It's really just like a singular thing.
I'm going to go back and read some of his stuff. This is the first book by him that I've read, and I loved it. And it has Count Chocula as a main character.
Yes.
I found that there was a kind of anger to it too. Did you feel that? Yeah. Okay.
No, super, extremely. That's very, very true. And he's not ever written that way before. I mean, he doesn't. If you know him, he's like this super docile, sweet guy, and you wouldn't think he's angry, but yeah, it is really angry. And I think it was written at a time he had like really bad health and almost died. And I think, and he's fine now, as far as I know. But I think that kind of, I don't know. I think it was such a tough thing. He was really in a lot of pain and stuff for a long time. So I think that kicked the anger up. But it is really angry, but never not hilarious. So.
Yeah, even when he's invoking suicide, there's something funny about it. Yeah. I really recommend anybody who wants to read some new experimental fiction. Castle Faggot is the book for you, I think.
Yeah.
Another book that I read at kind of on your recommendation just recently. Actually, I'm about 3/4 of the way through it, and I don't know whether to be thankful or angry at you for having me read this book. But it's Hogg by Samuel Delaney.
Yeah, that might be the most extreme book in English ever written. Yeah,
I think it really is. Could you give us the brief on that too?
Well, that's Samuel Delaney, who's like best known for writing like this kind of I mean, he's best known for this book Dahlgren, and he's written a lot of science fiction, and it's very stylish and very kind of innovative science fiction. But this is just like, it's like this kid who ends up with this trucker, and they just go drive around in this truck, and there's a lot of shit eating, like a lot.
Yeah, yes, a lot.
It's a tough one. But yeah, it's like really terse and really simple in a certain way, almost like a pulp novel. But it's so extreme. I mean, there are people who are extreme like Peter Sotos and stuff, but this is really up there with challenging content. Yeah.
This kind of makes Peter Sotos feel like Michael Chabon or something.
No, Peter would like die if he heard you say that. I hope he doesn't listen. Yeah.
I was just wondering as I read it, what do you think? Do you have any sort of speculation as to like what a writer gets out of writing something like that? Is it just an id expulsion kind of a thing, or?
Well, I mean, he's a smart guy, Samuel Delaney. So I'm sure he was very aware that, like, that to work with that material and in a literary way, I'm sure he was very aware that what he was doing and how extreme it was and stuff. So, but I mean, I guess there's always some kind of id in writing about that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously there's a kind of sexual charge to it. I mean, it's written almost pornographically at times.
Yeah.
About all this fecal sex and things. So I think there'd have to be, otherwise it wouldn't work. I mean, it wouldn't. You can't manufacture that. I think you would have to know what it feels like to be libidinally aroused by something like that, because it certainly conveys that.
It's almost a confessional of fantasies.
Yeah, no, it has a kind of pulp porn novel quality to it. But at the same time, it's much better written and well structured than something that's just tossed off without a masturbation going on in the background.
Yeah, I think that's what is keeping me going. I mean, that and just wanting to see what Hogg is going to do next.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is too personal, but I was also wondering if do you get turned on when you're writing sex scenes?
Oh, it depends. Usually not. Because I'm always really thinking about like the effect and stuff, and
right.
And also, I mean, I've been writing about explicit sex for a really, really, really long time, and I kind of have a sense of how it works and doesn't work. So it's not really. I think maybe when I was younger, I was playing more. I was using more my own like desires and things to make decisions, but I think not really. I mean, I can't remember being particularly aroused or something when I wrote.
Because you're focused on the craft of it.
Yeah, because I mean, I just like sort of. I mean, the way I write is I just kind of like explode stuff out, and then I spend 2 years editing and refining it. So it's such a laborious process, and it's so complicated that it's not like I write a book in one burst. It's like it's kind of layering. It's this very layered process for me. So most of the time I'm just like trying to think of how to make the prose interesting.
How different are your first drafts from what you put out?
Extremely.
Yeah, because your sentences they're so honed, I feel.
Yeah, I work really hard on them. I mean, I have a kind of natural writing speaking voice that I use, and then I don't take it away from that, but I definitely I complicate it, and I prettify it, or I work with the rhythm, make the rhythm more interesting, more deliberately interesting, or something than it may be when I talk or something. But yeah, they're super chiseled. I mean, I work really hard on the prose. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to write good sentences but bad books?
Sure, most books are. I mean, that whole literary fiction, I'm so completely uninterested in literary fiction,
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Like who today, who would we be thinking of when we say that?
Oh, I don't know. There's so many of them.
Just whatever the New York Times bestseller list is.
Yeah, that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, except most of the New York Times bestseller list isn't even literary, but it's just like schooled. It's just like beautiful sentences and felicitous, prose and I don't know, just so crafted but it just feels really dead to me or something. There's just no fire in it or something. I mean, I love stuff that's just. I love just stuff that's just purely prose and experimental. I mean, I like novels that aren't about anything, that are just these kind of crazy constructions. But even there's this kind of drive or something, or kind of like obsession or something you feel in the work. But with this kind of literary fiction, it's just like, in a way, it's the same old thing, like kind of a calculated story that's like got a little bit of love in it and a little bit of loss in it and a little bit of this and that. And then it's just like so beautifully written. Oh, beautiful sentences, It's that kind of stuff. It's just like the kind of literary equivalent of like The Voice. You know what I mean? It's like, people who win like, American Idol. It's like,
right.
it's like, or Lady Gaga. It's like, oh, Lady Gaga can sing. Who cares? I mean, it's that kind of thing. It's like people really like that now. It seems like there's a very big fondness for people who prove that they're, it's like such a good singer. I mean, or such a good guitar player that's so good, I just don't, I'm not interested in that. So
this is reminding me of an essay you wrote, I think in the 90s. We're talking about how the sort of fortunes of experimental fiction kind of rise and fall, and it goes in and out of vogue. Where do you think we are right now in the state of experimental fiction?
Oh, I think in a really good place. I think it's like, this is like, I mean, I guess I've said this a bunch of times, but I feel like it's like a total renaissance now. It has been for about the last, maybe, I don't know, 8 years or something in the United States, especially because there's all there's so many of these really, really, really good smaller presses, and they're publishing these writers that would never have gotten published by the major presses because their stuff is way too inventive. And there's just so many. I just read, I read a lot. And I'm just reading so many books by newer writers, especially, that are just, crazy. I mean, it wasn't there. But when I was younger, it was really like there were a few small presses like New Directions or City Lights or something. Right. But generally, you had to be published by a major press, or I mean, it's like that was, if you didn't, you were kind of a loser or something. But now that's not true at all. I mean, now it doesn't matter anymore. I mean, you can publish with some small press that's in wherever, Indiana or something, and it's just as valuable as to publish with whatever, HarperCollins or something. Right.
Could you name check? I mean, if you think about a couple of recent novels that have been really stood out for you.
Oh, that's so hard because I like so many.
You read a lot, huh? Yeah.
I just did this thing on my blog this last weekend of like where I picked my favorite books of the year. And there's a bunch in there. Maybe people could go to my blog and look at the one for the weekend, this last weekend, because there's a whole bunch of. I put my favorite books of the year. There's a ton in there, but it's like hard when I start to think about it. I mean, there's this Maggie Siebert wrote this really good book called Bonding, and
oh yeah, I've heard what I've wanted to read her, but I haven't yet.
It's very good, very, very good. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot.
Well, for people listening in the future, that would be Dennis's blog from around like December 11th or 12th, 2021.
Yeah, the week. Yeah, it's like the 11th and 12th.
How much time do you spend reading? Or like, what are your daily reading habits like?
I read quite a lot. I mean, I don't really have I don't really have habits for anything except for that when I do my blog. It's I have to do that because I talk to everybody every day, so I have to do that in the mornings every day. But generally, it's just like I just have this. I have a lot of energy, and it's really scattered. So I just kind of am all over the place. Like, oh, I want to write a little bit now. Now I'll make a blog post. Now I want to go read something for a while. Now I want to go look at stuff on YouTube, and it just happens. I just have books here, and I just pick them up, and I'll read for an hour, and then I'll put it aside and do something else, or I'll pick up a different book. Yeah. So I'm just reading all the time, and I'm not someone who necessarily feels, because I don't care about plot and story and stuff like that very much. I don't really necessarily feel like I have to read the entire book. I'll read like 40 or 50 pages of it and go like, okay, I get it. I mean, it's like this is really good, and it doesn't matter what happens in the story. And I get the prose. I'm taken enough with the prose, and I'm excited enough about it that I think I got what I needed from this.
That feels really liberating to like not read for plot. I feel like we're kind of enslaved by it. Like I think it would be hard for me to let go of that.
I guess so. I've never been like that. I've always read experimental fiction since I first started reading. I mean, well, since I was a teenager, I went straight in, because I was just reading like junk. I was just reading like novelizations of TV shows when I was a kid because I didn't really care. And then I discovered like, Rimbaud and Baudelaire and Genet and all that stuff when I was 15. And then I kind of like, ever since then, I've just mostly read stuff that to one degree or another is experimental, whether it's like, the kind of European kind or whether it's like metafiction or whatever. It's like, so I've never read for plot. And so it's very foreign to me. I mean, I just read the Joey Williams novel, which I loved. She's probably my favorite writer, and that has a plot in it. and I'm interested by the plot, but I feel like the plot is just kind of like fuel to keep the reader. It's like forward momentum. Yeah.
Right. That's the new one. What's that called?
Yeah, it's called Harrow. It's very, if you like her, I love her writing so much. And
I do too.
Yeah, it's very good. But yeah, I don't know about the plot thing. It's like you had C.A. Conrad on there on your show, and he was doing this whole rag against the novel and stuff. And I thought really I think he's a very good poet, but he was really generalizing because he was making it seem like that's what novels were. It's like stories and plots and stuff. And I was like, I don't think so at all. I mean, I never read books like that.
Yeah. I think maybe they were using that as like shorthand for the kind of literary novel you're talking about. I would hope so. I was just, you mentioned your early reading, Rimbaud and Baudelaire and people like that. I know that the Marquis de Sade was important for you too. And I'm really kind of interested in him because he's one of those writers that there's kind of just a cliched take on him, that he's just like the perv or something like that.
All right.
And like, what's the value of reading him? And if somebody wants to get started, what should they read first?
Well, it's really hard for me to speak about that in a kind of general or non-personal way because, I mean, to me, it was like because I was a sort of tormented person with a like weird, scary imagination. So when I read him, I read 120 Days of Sodom, which is basically where I would recommend everybody start. It was just like this. It was so legitimizing. It was like, Christ, not only does someone like talk aloud about this, but they write about it, but it's like serious literature, right? Because it was published by Gros Press, and there were essays by Simone de Beauvoir and stuff in there, and it was like,
right.
So to me that was super liberating because it's like, oh, I can actually try to write about this stuff, and it's not, I'm not a freak or whatever. I think that for people who find that material, and not most people obviously do not. I think it's very liberating in that sense. I mean, he's a hell of a. I mean, I've only read the translations, but I mean, the prose is hilarious. It's like so Baroque and complicated. I love the prose. It's so. I mean, I have to skim it. It's like he's so fucking verbose. I can't believe anybody actually reads those all the way through without skimming like huge sections of them because he just goes on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah, it's quite heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just that. It's liberating. I think it's liberating to realize, like, if you read that anything is legitimate for as a subject for literature. Basically, that's what it tells you. Right.
Did your parents pay attention to your reading habits when you were a teenager? Like, were they like, "Oh my God, my kid's reading de Sade"?
Well, I didn't. They didn't. They didn't know. I mean, I didn't know. No, but I mean, I was 15 by then, and I was doing a lot of drugs, and I was like running around with my friends. I think by then they had basically given up on me as whatever. So and before then, I only read like the Man from U.N.C.L.E. novels or the Batman novels. I didn't read anything. I mean, my parents did not like. I read Mad Magazine. I was addicted to Mad Magazine when I was a little kid, and they didn't like that. They thought that was too very, very subversive, and I shouldn't read Mad Magazine. But but no, they didn't really know. I didn't. I mean, I wasn't really close with my family, so I was just. I just read privately and stuck them under the bed or hid them in the back of my drawer or something.
Yeah. Were your parents readers?
No. We had this house and there was like this library and it was full of books. Like this whole room was full of books, but almost every single book was like these. I don't know if they still make them Reader's Digest condensed, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
They just went to some kind of giant yard sale and bought a bunch of things that looked like books and put them in there. And there was like, they never took a single book out of the shelves. I know they didn't read. They didn't read
It's so
all.
Strange. I have a friend who I won't name here who just recently, this still happens, he bought books by the yard to just kind of fill up the shelving in his house.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, they wanted the spines to look kind of nice, I guess. That was the only. So no paperbacks. It was all hardcover. Right.
Talking about reading Sade early on and Rimbaud, it's pretty, like you said, it can be pretty complex, kind of like thick, florid prose. But your style is so, like we said, so sort of concise and clear. Are there writers that like got you started on finding your style? You know the distinction I'm making?
Yes. Yeah, it's a good question. I've been influenced a lot by things that aren't books. I've been really influenced a lot by films and music and stuff. And so there. I think like in terms of the style, I can't think of a writer model for my style actually, which is kind of strange. But I can think of like maybe like songwriters or maybe punk was very had a big impact on me. And,
yeah.
When I was first writing, like when I was writing Closer, I was like, I always like studied music and try to figure out how they get that effect in music. And when I was writing Closer, I was like paying a lot of attention to like Psycho Candy by Jesus and Mary Chain, especially, and thinking like, how can I get that effect? Like super, super simple, kind of enigmatic prose, whatever lyrics, and then this kind of noise. How does that work in prose? Can you make the prose make this kind of caterwauling quality, and then put these really simple things in? So it was probably more than that. And then of course there's this filmmaker Robert Bresson. He was like a huge influence on me. His stuff's very, 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 very complicated, but very, very simple. So, but I can't think of I like really simple prose. I can think of things I read later after the novels I read much later that but I can't think of anybody. The Story of the Eye is very simple, and
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So there were things here and there, I think.
Story of the Eye by Georges Bataille, for people who don't know, which is another pretty transgressive, pretty sexual, pretty incredible book. That's really interesting because I don't think I've heard you say that about the Jesus and Mary Chain or music before, but like that's what you did. You nailed that. That really makes a lot of sense.
Thanks. I think of music as being like the most forward art. It's like they're always like really. It's always really, if you pay attention to the outer reaches of it, like the people that are really pushing the boundaries. It's so far ahead of like books and film and even visual art. I think because it's just space. That's what it's so great. It's just this space, and you can fill this space with anything, and all you need is like. It's like for me, if somebody doesn't like content, that's what's great about music is music is just structure. It's just like, textures and effects and things structured in such a way that gets you excited and stuff. So, and Jesus and Mary Chain was great at that time. That one record was great because it was so angsty and stuff, but it was so dense but with all my books I do that. I have to name check them and like when I was writing, I wrote this novel Try and. And in the book, there's this kind of the book is kind of a battle between the Husker Du and Slayer because I was really fascinated by both of them, and so that happens in the book. There's this kid who likes Slayer, and there's the kid who likes Husker Du. And then when I wrote this book Guide, that was really about this kind of thing in me because I was a super indie rock kid, and I was really, really, especially into lo-fi. I was like hugely into lo-fi. But at that point, I started listening to all this electronic early rave music, like Aphex Twin and Orbital and Orb and all that stuff. Right. And I was so taken with it. So it was this kind of like, oh, how do I reconcile these two things? And so music is always really, really influential on me.
Was it Guide? It makes sense, I guess, based on the title, but I can't remember. Was it Guide that had a lot of guided by voices in it too?
Yeah, Robert Pollard's kind of my living god. So, and I had just discovered Guided by Voices, and so I was extremely in love with them. Yeah. They're in there. Pavement and Sebadoh. It's that whole kind of era that I love that music. So
Robert Pollard is a great poet.
Yep, he is indeed.
Do you have a favorite lyricist? Would it be him, or are there other people that you think of?
I think probably him. In a completely different kind of way. It's kind of a weird person to bring up, but I actually think Randy Newman is like a really amazing lyricist. I think that his early stuff is just kind of phenomenally profound and smart, and Pollard is so inventive and he's just so knowing and inventive all the time I guess he's my favorite.
Yeah, and so prolific.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It's quite a lot.
It's really, I'm a hardcore, and it's just like, and they release stuff every, he or Guided by Voices release stuff like every month and a half. It's like almost impossible to keep up.
There's a book of his poems too that's really good. I think it's probably pretty hard to find, but maybe you've seen it. I think it's called Eat, E-A-T.
Oh yeah, it's a magazine actually. Yeah.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, I just have one. I guess I just have one issue then, because I thought it was a book, like a standalone thing.
No, there's like 80 of them now. Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. I guess part of your story that I'm interested in also, you mentioned, we've talked about punk a little bit, but you moved to London, right, to kind of be a punk rocker in like the 70s. And like,
I just visited. I didn't live there. I don't know. I just went there to check it out. I went there with a friend in 76 or 5, I can't remember.
Okay.
And we just went there to basically because we heard that the punk thing was happening there, and so we went just to kind of investigate it. But I was only there a couple of months.
What do you remember from when you were around that age? What were you reading?
I was reading. Let's see, that age. I was reading early cyberpunk writers. I was kind of into them, especially William Gibson, and I was reading. Peter Handke. I was like into him, and I was reading Andre Gide, and I don't remember. I mean, I've always read so much, so I can't remember who I was into at that time. But I was reading all the time when I was on vacation. Probably a lot of French stuff. I mean, I'm a huge Francophile, so
yeah. I mean, you live there.
Yeah, that happened.
What about fanzines? Is that kind of the time when you first found interest in fanzines, or were there earlier things before the punk era?
Oh, there wasn't really anything before that. I mean, there must have been like Monster Magazine, things for like science fiction and kind of nerds and stuff.
Right.
But I wasn't really. No, it was like the punk, and then there was this whole queer punk thing that happened for a while, and there was like a huge number of zines that were made during that kind of era, and that was really exciting. That was like kind of the heyday of the zine, and there was these magazines that I can't remember. There was one magazine that was like. It listed all of them, and you'd get it every month, and you could order all those things.
Fact Sheet 5?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like I was really obsessed with zines, yeah. So, and then, of course, the internet kind of killed that. But
yeah.
But there's cool websites.
Yeah. A lot of kids started making zines again in like the 2010s, but I found that they were less focused on writing and more focused on imagery.
Yeah, that makes sense, right?
Which I prefer writing heavy zines myself.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of like websites that publish, that I guess you have to go to them to find. They're like zines, like Self-Fuck and 1111 and Expat and Scab. There's quite a number of ones that are very good.
X-Ray. I don't know any of those.
Yeah, they're all like they're basically like. I guess they're like zines. I mean, they just publish new writing all the time, on their sites. So, and I just keep an eye on them. Real Pants. There's one called Real Pants.
That's a good name.
Yeah.
I guess that talking about zines makes me think about Little Caesar, the magazine fanzine that you made, which is like pretty legendary, man. I'm sure that you know that, but like that's kind of like a holy grail for zine collectors.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I wish I'd kept a bunch of them so I could make some money because they are kind of valuable now. But I don't really hardly have any. Yeah, no, that was in the late 70s through like 83. Yeah, it was super great, and it was just a really good time too. And I don't know what, but I could. And the thing that was cool about it was that I could publish like young writers my age, and then I could also I could write to Andy Warhol and say, hey, do you want to give me something for my zine? And he would, or Lou Reed. I published like this Lou Reed poem that had never been published before because I just wrote to Lou Reed, and I'm like, hey, can I have a poem?
Yeah.
And they're like, sure, because they thought it was such a spunky little project that they were like, sure, kid. So I got to have all kinds of stuff. It ended up being really multimedia or something because it was like all over the place. It was really fun. Yeah, I mean, I keep wanting to reprint it. We've talked about it many times. So people have asked me many times about doing a facsimile, and I really want to do it. But the problem is that the rights are insane. I mean, it's like, and there's all these people like Andy Warhol and Lou Reed and Nico and so many people who are now dead. And it's like to get the rights to that stuff to reprint it. I don't even know. It would be so much work. So much.
That'd
work.
be pretty nightmarish. And I'm sure that like pulling out the people whose rights you couldn't get would leave. It just wouldn't be the same thing. Yeah.
I mean, what I could do is just scan it and put it on a website or something. I don't think anybody would care then.
Yeah, there are scans out there. I mean, I think on your site there's some scans, but I found you can find them kind of floating around too.
Yeah, it was fun. It was super fun to do. It was great.
Is it accurate to call it? I've seen it described as like a punk poetry thing. Do you think does that ring true to you?
Yeah, it started out that it was definitely because I went to England and we and looked at saw all these bands and wandered around, and there was like all these punk zines at that time, like Sniff and Glue and these other ones, and I was super excited by them, and those did inspire me to start one, and I got this whole idea of like poetry should be as popular as whatever as rock and roll, and so that was kind of my goal, was to write kind of like I'm gonna publish this magazine, show everybody how cool poetry is, and it's going to be like, because I was like, there's Richard Hell and all those people, and Patti Smith and stuff, and they were like poets, right? So I thought, come on, this is not. And so the idea was, to sort of like make poetry cool, and it kind of worked in a small way.
I think it did, absolutely. Well, there was Little Caesar Press, and then there was the Beyond Baroque scene where you were kind of the director of a reading series. And there's this kind of like second life for you beyond being a writer, of being kind of like an editor / facilitator for other writers. There's the imprint, right? Little House on the Bowery that you...
Right.
Is that still going?
No. When I moved to... I mean, I still live in Los Angeles too, but I'm really always here. Because I couldn't. Little House. I loved Little House on the Bowery. It was great, and Johnny Temple was great to let me do it, and Akashic. But it was really hands on. I mean, like I would tour with them and do readings with them, and I was like really, really involved in getting the books out and getting. And when I moved over here, I couldn't do it. I didn't want to do it in a half-assed way because I couldn't devote the kind of time to it. And so I just thought I'm not gonna do this in a half-assed way. I'm just gonna stop. So.
Well, it's a lot of work being an editor also.
It is, but I mean, Akashic took care of a lot of it. So I mostly just had to edit the book, choose the books and edit them, and then they would pretty much take care of everything else. But I just personally wanted to really support them by, like going on tours with the writers and doing interviews with them and stuff. Just felt like I just didn't want to, I just felt it was, especially since a lot of them were like really young writers and new writers, and they didn't have they couldn't naturally, get people interested in what they were doing. And also that was before this whole indie publishing boom, like when I did Little House on the Bowery, it was like, there were not very many very small presses doing that kind of thing. Yeah. And one of the reasons why I felt okay quitting too is because by then there were so many good presses doing basically what Little House on the Bowery were doing that I didn't really feel it was such a necessity.
I don't want to ask you to choose favorites, but like what's a book from Little House on the Bowery that kind of comes to mind first, like a good introduction to what you were doing with the series?
I'm going to choose Headless by Benjamin Weissman because it's a great book, and he hasn't published anything in like forever since then, and nobody really reads those books. And he's a really, really fantastic, hilarious writer. So I would say if you can get Headless by Benjamin Weissman.
What's it like? Is it about something, or is it a content-free book?
It's stories. It's very kind of outrageous and very, very, very funny. And his prose is just hilarious. I don't know. It's hard to describe. I mean, he's really singular. He also had a book out earlier than that called Dear Dead Person that Serpent's Tail put out. That's an excellent book too. And I think he's finally finishing, like 30 years later, he's finishing a new book. But just because I think he's so good, and I don't think people really think about him at the moment, that's why I would go with that. But I mean, I'm really proud of like all the books I published. So
yeah, sure. His titles are so good. Dear Dead Person.
Yeah, he's very funny. He's super funny. Yeah, he's super funny.
Was he part of the Beyond Baroque scene, or was he not a... Yeah, he was. So can you kind of like give me the basics on Beyond Baroque for people who don't know? And it existed before you, but I don't know if it existed after you, but like what was it?
No, it's still going. It's still going really strong, actually.
Oh, cool. I didn't know. I live in LA. I should know that, I guess, but I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it's still there, and same building, and seems to have quite a scene around it. It was like a literary arts center. It was a kind of like St. Mark's Poetry Project or something. It had readings and workshops and things. they just asked me because I was doing, because you had to typeset things back then, and Little Caesar was a one-man operation kind of thing, so I had to like type it on their typesetting machine and lay it out, and put the papers into that horrible whatever chemical and dry them and hang them up and dry them, and then do the whole thing with build the book. So I was doing that at Beyond Baroque because they had a printing center, and they just asked me if I would be interested in running the reading series, and I was always going to the reading series. I said sure. So I just took over this Friday night reading series, and then I just started having as many interesting writers, like my kind of crowd of, there was these kind of gang young writers that I was very close with and who I thought were great. And then also just trying to lure, partially through Little Caesar, because Little Caesar had become kind of like a cool thing. Right. And through that I was able to sort of like say, kind of connect the two a little bit and bring out writers that I really loved, like Joe Brainard or Ron Padgett
wow.
Yeah, people I liked from New York to come read at Beyond Baroque. I'd say like, hey, I only have $200, and they'd be like, I'll just take a trip out there and go see my family or something, and I'll do a reading. They were all very nice about it. So then, yeah, but then I ran it for like 3 years, and it was just kind of a hopping place, and it was super exciting. And then I was doing Little Caesar and the Beyond Baroque, and then most of my writer friends all had presses, and they were putting up magazines too. It was pretty great.
I have to ask if you have any memories about Joe Brainard. He's one of my favorite writers.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah, I published his last book with Little Caesar. I was so proud of that. I was so happy about that. I knew him especially when I moved to New York in 1983. I knew Joe pretty well. We hung out a lot, and he's like, enormously humble, shy to the point of weirdness person with a very bad stutter, and just lovely. And at that point, he'd kind of given up, and he'd quit making art and quit writing. So I don't know what he was doing, but he kind of had stopped, and I have no idea. I don't know if anyone knows why he quit, but he was just an absolute dear, just an absolute sweetheart, but very, very odd, but very, 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 just generous and kind, and I don't know.
Yeah, that's the sense that you get from his work, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the book that people always recommend that would probably be the one to start with would be I Remember, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of generosity in that book, I think.
Yeah. I mean, actually, he's people only really know I Remember, but he's great all the time. And there's a book of his, I don't know, collected or selected writings, and that's actually terrific because he was as great as I Remember is. I mean, he was really, really good all the time. And actually, his visual art is quite charming too.
Visual art's great. I'm actually looking at a copy of this old literary zine called Unmuzzled Ox.
Oh yeah.
From New York, and it has some Brainard comics in it. They're fantastic. His Nancy comics are so great.
Yeah, no, I published a bunch of his comics on Little Caesar. Yeah, Unmuzzled Ox. Yeah, that was like a kind of an influence on Little Caesar and Muzzled Ox. Yeah.
Oh, was it really? I see. It's a mysterious thing to me. I just found a copy at a bookstore in New York a long, long time ago and grabbed it, and it's this kind of it's got like Ed Sanders and Robert Creeley and Kathy Acker. It's got all these people in it, but I don't know much about it beyond just this issue that I have.
Yeah, well, it came out, and it was a little bit of an influence because, well, I like the writers in it, but also because it had like images in it, and it had kind of like a lot of energy about it. So that was kind of a bit of a model too. It wasn't like Little Caesar came out of the blue. I mean, there were these other magazines doing stuff. That was one of them.
So I'm just going back to Beyond Baroque for a second. Like, who were like the local stars? Like when you were running it, who were kind of like the rock stars of the Beyond Baroque scene?
Of the Beyond Baroque scene? Oh, I don't know if there were any rock stars. We were all really young. Oh no, I mean there were like famous writers that we got that lived in LA that we got brought in to read, like Christopher Isherwood and people like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
But maybe the question is better asked like who were some of the people that were there that were kind of like major to it when you were doing it, but who have been kind of like forgotten by history now? Because like I just read that critical biography of you, and like there's just these passages where all these names get rattled off, and there are all these writers, a lot of whom I've never heard of, and like now I want to go and check all of them out.
Well, I mean, most of them are still out there and doing well. I mean, Amy Gerster was like, she was like my best friend. We kind of like started the whole scene together, and she's like, won big awards and stuff as a poet, and she's great. And Jack Skelly was always really. He kind of disappeared for a long time, and he's making a kind of comeback. Semiotext is going to publish a book of his, and
That's cool.
Yeah, he's just suddenly reemerged. And then there's Benjamin Weissman, and there's David Trinidad, who's a pretty well-known poet now. Yeah. And then there's there was this young punk poet named Ed Smith, and he died really young. He killed himself. But there was a big book of his poems that were published. It was published like a year ago, 2 years ago. And he was great. And then Bob Flanagan, who became kind of famous for his masochistic performances.
Yeah.
But they're going to publish his poetry's been out of print forever, and they're going to publish his poetry. But
I know him for his performances, his masochism, his masochistic performances. But I had no idea he was a poet until I started reading this critical bio. Yeah, what kind of a poet was he? Like, what kind of mode did he write in?
Not like his performances. I mean, it's much more lyrical and it's gentler than that. I mean, I think he did write some stuff that was kind of like button pushing. But I mean, he wrote a lot about his illness because he had cystic fibrosis, and from when I met him, he had it his whole life, and so he wrote a lot about medical stuff because he was just always like going to the doctor and trying to stay alive.
Right.
So I don't know. There's going to be a book coming out. I think they're working on it now, so you can see.
I'm going to find the Ed Smith book too. I mean, that's a hard name to Google, I guess, but I can probably track it down.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the book, but it's edited by David Trinidad. So if you do Ed Smith, David Trinidad, you'll find it.
Okay, cool.
It's great. It's really, really, really good book. Yeah.
I'm wondering if I can ask you about crystal meth.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I know that you had your time with crystal, and I'm wondering, like, could you read when you were high on crystal?
Could I read? That's a good question. I don't think I had any patience. I mean, it was when I was in Amsterdam. That's when I was living in Amsterdam is when I got really into. They called it PEP over there.
That's great. Meth. Wow, yeah. I've never heard that before.
Much more charming, much more sweet word than
it's cute.
Yeah. I think I must have read because I read a billion books while I was there, and I was starting to work on the George Miles cycle books while I was in Amsterdam. So I must have read because I read that's where I read almost all the nouveau roman novels and got really excited by them. So I guess I did, and I wasn't always on crystal meth. It wasn't like I was on it 24 hours a day. I just was doing it, once in a while. But so I guess I did. I don't have any memory of reading. I know I wrote a lot that was just complete garbage. I don't know if you've ever taken crystal meth, but you just you just spew out whatever, and then of course it's all completely dreadful.
Yeah. It's not even the kind of stuff that you can go back and edit down, really. I don't think.
No, unfortunately not. No.
Do you think anybody's ever captured the feeling of being high on crystal in writing?
Wow.
Is that possible?
Probably. I mean, I don't know what it would be. How would you capture that? This extreme energy, and I don't know, like, because there's a kind of psychosis. You get this kind of psychosis that's a very particular kind of psychosis.
Yeah. You'd have to throw punctuation out the window too, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess you would. But but the people who do stuff like that, like Guittard or Burroughs or something, that doesn't seem like crystal meth work. So I don't know. I don't know what it would be. I'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah, I guess Burroughs.
He wrote a book called Speed.
Yeah, he wrote a book called Speed, and I think, as I remember, it does kind of get it, but. I don't know. I really like your take on Burroughs. It seems like he's so hallowed to so many people that people are afraid to say that he did start to become. His books weren't that good when he wasn't really writing them himself toward the end of the second half maybe of his career. Yeah. But is there a favorite Burroughs book for you?
Oh, I guess probably The Wild Boys.
Yeah.
I mean, I really like everything from Naked Lunch to The Wild Boys. I mean, that period. I love Ticket That Exploded and No Express. That whole Soft Machine. I love that stuff. It's just after that, then I lost interest. And I don't like the Junkie and those early ones very much. They're too pulpy for me. But that period when he was doing the cut ups, and then I guess Wild Boys was kind of just post cut up, but it still feels kind of like that. I love that stuff.
And it's true that he was kind of, I mean, to be kind, let's say he was getting some help with writing later on, right? Is that a fact?
Is it a fact? Well, I don't. I got in like huge amount of trouble for saying that. But I mean, how do I say it? It's pretty sure that it. Yes, I mean, I mean, yes. Let's just say yes. But I mean, but I'm not. But it may be that I now get hell come down on me again from people who try to say that it wasn't true. But let's just say that I knew people, and I was, I knew people who knew him very well, and I kind of knew that was going on. So
I heard that you guys kind of like shared a boyfriend at one point or something like that.
Yeah.
Is this too much? Am I going into
No, it's fine. I had a boyfriend. I don't know if I should say his name or not, but anyway, I had a boyfriend, and he was having a thing with Burroughs, and he would fly out to Lawrence, Kansas every once in a while and spend like a weekend or a week with him. It was totally fine. It didn't bother me. I think it bothered the people who took care of Burroughs more than it bothered me, but it didn't bother me.
You mentioned the George Miles cycle, and I'm not going to ask you to describe that for the millionth time. I'll put it in the introduction for people who don't know. But it's a cycle of 5, I guess 6 now, right?
No, this isn't part of the cycle.
It doesn't qualify. So your most recent book is I Wished, which is kind of like. Is it a capstone to this? I mean, how does it relate to the rest of the George Miles cycle?
See, here's the thing, right? I just wanted to write a book about George. And I wanted to write a book that was really, really personal, because I'd never written a book that was really, really personal and that used my real life in such a strong way and used my real feelings in such a strong way. I'd always really been carefully used that stuff as material in a very distant kind of way before. So I wanted to do that. George was this person who had this massive, massive impact on me. Our friendship, he just had this huge impact on me. And so I thought, if I'm going to write a book, if I'm going to go into this very deep stuff, I'm going to go to the thing that's the hardest, most difficult thing for me to think about, which is George, because it's a very difficult area for me. So that's why I wrote about him. And the reason the cycle is brought up is because I knew people knew he was in the cycle, and then because I'm writing about everything, I'm talking about how I'm trying to memorialize him and how I'm trying to pay tribute to him and try to build monuments to him and all this stuff. I mean, that's what the book's about. So I mentioned the cycle in there because it's a kind of honest book, and then because that was this thing I tried to make for him. I made for him, but that's it. I mean, otherwise, I don't think, for me, it's like you don't have to read the cycle or anything to read the book. I mean, you can decide that George Miles cycle thing is just like a fiction, like.
Right.
So I don't think. So I understand why people connect them, and obviously, if you know the cycle, but I don't feel like it's. I don't see it as being like a postscript of the cycle or anything like that. Okay.
I mean, I found it very moving in a way that the cycle books didn't, emotionally impact me. So, but something I was wondering is, do you think is there? I think the George Miles cycle is pretty unprecedented, but are there ancestors in doing that, and kind of like this massive, almost career-spanning obsession that drives so much work? I thought a little bit about Odette from Proust, but that's not quite the same.
Yeah, no, there are, there's Dante had, what's her name, and there's someone that I can't remember the name of that Robbe Grillet had as a kind of muse for his books, but I don't know. I mean, there's precedence for like experimental tetralogies and trilogies and whatever, quintologies and stuff. So,
like what?
Oh, I don't know, like the Burroughs books, for instance. I mean, we just talked about Burroughs. I mean, the Naked Lunch through To Get Exploded, or like a tetralogy. And
you just mentioned Robbe Grillet, and you mentioned the nouveau roman writers a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
I read somewhere, maybe it was the critical biography, I read somewhere that they were like the, quote, the last piece of the puzzle for you in terms of your influences.
Because I was in Amsterdam and I was trying to write. I went over there partly. Well, I went there for love, but I also went there because I wanted to get away so I could really write the cycle. Because I've been talking about writing the cycle for like 4 or 5 years at that point. I mean, I'd been talking about it since I was 15, but I had this plan in mind, for a few years. So, and then I was just trying to figure out how to do it. And I'd done a lot of research with like real life research to things that I personally cannot do. Like before I went to Amsterdam, I would pick up prostitutes and things and try to see what objective sex, really objectified sex is like. And when I was in Amsterdam, there was a lot of stuff going on that was quite crazy at that point. So I was investigating that stuff, but I couldn't. But for the prose, it was just, for some reason I couldn't quite get what I wanted to do the writing. And then I was in this. There was this used English language bookstore in Amsterdam where somebody had gotten rid of almost all of the nouveau roman novels in English. And I had read a little bit of Robbe-Grillet and Marguerite Duras and stuff when I was younger, but I basically bought all of them and just read all of them. And for some reason, the kind of terseness of the writing that they all kind of shared, and then how much they did with it, and how it's so much about language and structure. And there was this great book by Robbe-Grillet called For the New Novel that I read at that time. It was just like, okay, now I think I get it. It was just like the final thing. I needed something, and I needed to see something in written form, like a novel or literature that had something to give me, because I couldn't get everything from Psycho Candy or whatever else.
Right.
And if for whatever reason, it's just like, okay, I can do this. It was like, that was it. It's just like I understood how I could find the voice, nail down the voice that I really wanted. So.
Maybe that goes back to that question of finding your style. Yeah. I see. I have trouble. I'm thinking of Robbe-Grillet and Duras and Nathalie Sarraute. I have trouble kind of describing the commonality among the nouveau roman writers. Do you have a way of kind of summing that up?
Yeah, I should, because I read them so much. And I really there's that. I mean, that book For the New Novel is really good. Not that if readers want to spend the time, it's a very short book, but that he kind of wrote the Bible of it, or the manifesto of the nouveau. It's objectivist, and it's against conventions, and it's against plot and story being the dominating force. It's against psychology. It's against a lot of things that are fundamental to at least the American kind of idea with a novel.
Yeah.
And it's so, but yeah, it's really a lot about objectivity. So it's like objective writing or something. It's hard for me to.
Yeah, it's a slippery kind of category. I think there's a lot of the writers in it kind of changed their style a lot from book to book too.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
Am I allowed to say that youth has been a big theme of your work?
Well, it's kind of obvious.
Right? Okay. I'm just making sure. I never like to assume things like that,
Yeah.
And also youth contrasted with adulthood, and I kind of start to wonder, how old do you feel inside?
I don't know. I never really think about it. It's really shocking to me when I look in the mirror. Let's just put it that way. I'm like, Jesus Christ, how did that happen? Because I don't really feel any different than I did, whatever, when I was years and years and years and years ago. I don't feel any different. I really don't. And so I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a particular age, because I don't know. I don't think of myself as being a particular age, but I just don't think I'm any different. I mean, I still am really excited by new music and new books and new movies and stuff. I'm still kind of totally excited, looking for innovation and stuff. And I don't think I've changed that much, you know what I mean? And most of my friends I've always been I've always had younger friends. Most of my friends are much younger than me. And I don't know why that is. It's not like I seek out young people to be friends with. It's just I get along better with them. It's when there's people my age, I mean, if they're artists, my friends who are my age are they're all artists. So they're just, because artists never get old. Artists just remain children,
Right.
In some ways or others. So all of us are just kind of the same. All of us are kind of these weird stunted whatever kids or adults or whatever. But so I don't know. I certainly don't think about I don't feel old. I mean, sometimes my back or something makes me think I'm old. But
right, yeah, no, totally. Yeah. I mean, I feel like a 46-year-old teenager half the time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't feel that different from that, except that I feel a lot calmer. It's I feel less stressed out and less because I kind of figured like, okay, I mean, because you go through stuff and you learn stuff and you're like, okay, this isn't the end of the world, and the Trump era is not the end of the world. It's just one of the most horrible phase we've ever lived through, but it's not the end of the world. It's like, this is going to pass, and the far right is going to pass, and it's like, because it will, it will, so you don't get as stressed out about stuff.
Yeah, because you've seen it happen a couple times. Like we lived through the Reagan era. We lived through
I'm old enough to have lived through the nuclear scare and all that stuff. That was intense.
That reminds me, is it true that your dad was friends with Richard Nixon?
Yeah, my brother's named after Richard Nixon.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah, my father was, they were really good friends and had a falling out at a certain point. But yeah, I mean, my father wanted to be president of the United States. I mean, he was all connected up with that scene. I mean, he knew all those guys, Haldeman and Ehrlichman and all those guys.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, but then he and Nixon had a big falling out. I think around the time Nixon became governor, and because my father became a Democrat, he went to the left. He took he smoked a lot of pot, and he went to this place called Esalen Institute, which was this kind of hippie place in Big Sur. Yeah. And he kind of had this awakening, and he became this kind of Democrat leftist guy. And so my father has this story he used to tell me. I mean, he's dead now. But my father used to tell me the story, like that he was having dinner with Richard Nixon, and they were having this kind of theoretical conversation about, like, let's say a country is a family, and Nixon and my father said the way you take over the family is you kill the father and then you take over the family. And Nixon said, no, the only way you can do it is to kill every single person in the family. And my father was so outraged, he picked up his plate of food and threw it on Nixon and stormed out. I think that was the last time they ever saw each other. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, if you kill the family, there's no family left to take over.
Yeah, I guess that was Nixon's mode there. So, yeah.
What is it like to have a critical biography written of you? Did you read it?
Oh, it's really strange. Yeah, I did read it, of course. It's I mean, flattering as hell. I mean, it's like, it's obviously it's super, super, super great that someone wanted to write a critical biography of me.
It's so full of references and associations. Do you feel like are they all right? Did everything ring true to you?
No. No, I mean, some of it, I mean, most of it's pretty good. I mean, there are things, it's like, I have read some critical biographies, but it's like, it's like you become the material for their kind of like their argument or their thing, right? Yeah. So the book was like, I'm an anarchist, and he wanted to make this point of like my anarchism being important, which is all very true. And then he had this, I don't know, he had this big thing about punk or something, and he kept making punk so important. And he made punk much more important than it was. And so there are things like that where I'm just like, well, where he kind of like, it's not like he did it in a bad way or evil way or something, but he got off on these tangents, and they made sense to him, but they actually weren't necessarily accurate, like where he says, like, that Frank O'Hara was like a god to me. Frank O'Hara was not a god to me.
He wasn't. Okay.
And that, that I found anarchism because I read Paul Goodman, because Frank O'Hara, like, I read like 4 or 5 pages of Paul Goodman in like 1980 and thought it was boring. So it's like, you know what I mean? So there's things like that, but it doesn't really matter ultimately. But yeah, I mean, if you get into like the nitty gritty, there are some things in there I'm like, yeah, that isn't really true. But I mean, I like the book. I mean, he says a lot of really good things, and I'm grateful that he paid attention to like my gift fiction and in the films and all that stuff. That was cool.
I feel like critical biography can kind of is like another way to say subjective biography.
Yeah. Dearman's whole thing is like, this is not the definitive thing. This is just my take on you. And that's why, it's like, it's cool. I mean, I'm happy about it.
You mentioned being an anarchist. Like, how does that show up in your daily life or in your practices?
Well, it's because it's completely impractical to think that anarchism could ever become like a system that the world would adhere to or live by. It's just impossible. We're way beyond that. You can't just, you can't. It would never happen. So yeah. I'm not someone who like thinks, we should physically dismantle the governments and all this kind of stuff, because I think it's just ridiculous. So it's like a philosophy. So it's basically just like a way to live or something. It's like it's just like, and it's all really simple. It's like basic, like power corrupts, and when you get power, disperse it, and and that kind of stuff. It comes down to really simple things, and you just basically you just live that way or something. Like, I'm against generalizations. That's part of my anarchism too. Is like, I don't believe you can't judge. So when people say, like, whatever, the Republicans are like this, or the fans of Led Zeppelin are like this, or whatever they're going to say, or people who listen to who like Machine Gun Kelly are like this. It's just I just turn off, because it's nonsense. And people do that all the time. Generalizations are like, especially these days, it's like, because everybody's so lazy, they're just like generalizing like crazy, like on social media and stuff about everything. So it's just like things like that. It's actually not complicated. It's not like I have to like look up in my rule book about what I need to do. It's just really simple, basic things like that, where I try to remember.
Is there writing on anarchism that you would recommend somebody read if they want to kind of get started thinking about it?
The thing about anarchism is that every single anarchist is a different anarchist, and anarchism is entirely different depending on the person, because it's all like, to me at least, anarchism is like, who are you, what do you do, what is your power, what is your strengths, what is your weaknesses, and then how do you collaborate with everyone in a way that will show respect to them, and that will not overly empower you. And Emma Goldman's really good. There are some really good writings on, there's some good writing on anarchism, but ultimately you basically make it up yourself. When I found out about anarchism, it was sort of like I was already doing it. I just didn't know how to structure it. So I was like, oh, this totally is me, so it just gave me a name for it, really.
You mentioned things being like a crazy in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
When you were living there, like, what do you mean?
Oh,
crazy things happening.
Oh no, it's just like, it was like this. It was just like this time, it was like the early '80s, and AIDS was happening, but it wasn't happening as much. It wasn't being seen in Europe, or at least in Amsterdam, taken as seriously as it was in the United States. Because in New York, my friends were dying, and were starting to die all the time, and so there was still a lot of hedonism going on. And there was a lot of drugs. There's obviously there was the legal pot and legal hash stuff and everything, but there was like a lot of speed, a lot of heroin, a lot of stuff like that. And then there was a lot of perversion. There was a lot of like serious S&M clubs. There was like,
what is it about Amsterdam? I guess it's just maybe cumulative that like one thing happens there, so other things start to happen there. But I wonder about what is it about that city that makes it so decadent and hedonistic.
Well, at the time, the Dutch were all about like tolerance, right? It's funny because the Dutch government has become much more conservative and much more right wing now. And that's actually, when you were there was this kind of like, well, we must tolerate everything, and be understanding about everything, and that was kind of the attitude. But they hated it. I'm generalizing wildly, but you had this sense of like great hostility towards these things that they were tolerating. So it was really complicated. But at the time, it was just like, it was just like, in Europe, it was like the wild city. It was the city where you went, because no place else had legal drugs,
right?
And the red light district, and there were like, there were houses of prostitution everywhere. There were all these like male prostitution houses, these boy brothels. I used to go and hang out there all the time. They were just like everywhere. It was a city about hedonism,
What, the brothels, you could just hang out in them, or were you a customer?
No, you didn't have to be a customer. I always like going to hustler bars because I like how the dynamic is so organized. So it's like, because I don't drink really, and I don't really like kind of cruising and all that nonsense. So if you go to a hustler bar and you're not a hustler, not a John, they don't care. You just sit there and you just like, they're just like, okay, I don't, they don't pay attention to you because you're not either sought after or seeking someone. So I liked going them because it was just kind of relaxing, and also it was interesting to watch the machinations go on between those people. But you could just go to them and have a drink. It was just basically there was like a bar, and then if you wanted someone from the bar, you'd go and take them up into a room upstairs.
Okay, thank you, Dennis, for your time and generosity. A couple of notes here. We talked about the book Hogg, Hogg, by Samuel Delaney, which Dennis himself says is very extreme. So be warned if you decide to pick it up. It is very extreme and not for everyone. I can't say I enjoyed it, but I also couldn't stop reading it. I think in the end, I do like it, but it's a tough one. Your mileage may vary. I feel like we also glossed over the nouveau roman writers pretty quickly, so if you want to check them out, I would really recommend starting with Nathalie Sarraut's book Tropisms. That's Tropisms. Although Alain Robbe-Grillet is probably the most famous one of the nouveau roman writers, and he's pretty great too. This episode was recorded by me at 8 in the morning in Los Angeles while Dennis was in Paris, France. It was post-produced and edited by Justin Geller and facilitated by Laris Kreslins, and the music is Bach, arranged and performed by Cyrus Germani. You can find more Apology stuff, including the magazine and sometimes some merch, at apologymagazine, all one word, .com. Thanks a lot. Talk to you next time.